As I mentioned before, Greg is senior counsel with the national international law firm of Bryan Cave Leighton Peisner. His work involves major real estate development and finance, as well as public and project finance. He's known as an expert in several fields, including development incentives, including tax credits, grants, tax-exempt debt, TIF funding, and more. Greg is on multiple nonprofit organization boards and is also the chairman of our sister organization, the Chicago Central Area Committee. And our special guest, Michael Fassnacht, President and CEO of World Business Chicago and Chief Marketing Officer for the City of Chicago. Introducing Michael is not simple because I was trying to put a encapsulated kind of brief bio, if you will, but there were pages of information of interesting things to talk about. So I think, in short, his long career is recognized as a global expert in building and marketing brands. That's a specific talent. And what he's doing for Chicago has been excellent so far. Anyway, he's the first to hold both the dual roles with World Business Chicago and the city, and he's worked on several important initiatives here, including the city's pandemic response, the Mayor Lightfoot's innovative Invest Southwest initiative, one of the things that our Chicago Central Area team is working on as well. In prior years, Michael was president for more than a decade with one of Chicago's leading advertising agencies, Foot Cone Building. He led them to unprecedented international creative recognition and above industry standard top line revenues, which is a feat in of itself. Before that, was a successful startup entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. So a small amount of expertise coming our way.
And good morning, Mark. Thank you for the very kind words, and I'm thrilled to be here. And it's always good to see some familiar faces. And I would get asked to describe for a few minutes what kind of my focus is, how I see so far 2021 and what's coming in the future and what's my perspective. So I run World Business Chicago, which is the economic development arm for the great city of Chicago. And we're really focusing on three things. First of all, we're really making sure that the existing large companies we have, Fortune 500 companies, and really everything over like almost $100 million revenue feels at home in Chicago, can grow in Chicago. We hear into their concerns, and we're helping them to expand in our city. Secondly, which was always traditional, our role is attracting new companies to Chicago because we cannot long-term successful if we don't grow our corporate footprint and therefore as well our population. And last but not least, which is definitely in this year, I think more important than ever before, but also challenging, how can we communicate the brand of the city of Chicago as a business-friendly destination for a lot of industries? So these are really very simple. The three focus areas: existing companies, because we need to have a strong ecosystem of strong firms, attracting new firms, and then as well building the business brand of City of Chicago. In our recovery thinking, already like last fall, we really try to identify what are the key industry sectors where we believe they will grow in the future, and we in Chicago and Chicagoland are particularly well positioned to take our unfair share. We identified 4 industries they were betting down to, and that we are focusing on the last 12 months extensively. First, food and agriculture has been super successful for us, and the pandemic has shown as well how food and agriculture is a key sector that's growing. 4 years ago, we had 85 food and ag companies headquartered in Chicago. Now we are over 400. So it's a huge sector for us. We will do it big. Probably one of the most global prominent conferences next year about the future of food, because we have a unique ecosystem of established CPG firms, Mondelez, Kraft Heinz, Conagra, but we also have a lot of startups. We probably have the hottest startup, a food startup in the country right now with Nature's Find, and we have a big announcement with them next week. And then we have a lot of research talent as well. So there's a great ecosystem in food and ag. Second, TDL, transportation, distribution, logistics, huge growth area for us. Hopefully you saw the great news. We announced officially the Uber Freight headquarters in the old post office. The global CEO of Uber, Dara, flew in for that event. And Uber Freight will have over 2,000 employees by early next year. They will work out of the old post office. Within the Uber family, it's the best performing division and fastest growing. And a lot of people don't even talk about this. They all have over 1 million truck drivers on their platform. Third, life science and healthcare. If you follow the life sciences growth, I think in Chicago, we always had the talent, we had the ideas, but we had a lack of lab space. Boston has right now roughly 30 million square footage of lab space in development. A couple of years ago, we had like less than 1 million. We made big progress throughout the pandemic. We have now over 5 million of lab space in development. And after I went on Tuesday morning to the Uber press conference, I went to Lincoln Yards, who announced the first life sciences space, which Andy Glore from Cerner told me is more or less fully leased already. And they'll build a second life sciences because they have pivoted as well with Lincoln Yards, focusing much more life sciences. With Dr. Suzette Kinney, they have an amazing leader as well who can drive this vertical. So life sciences is a huge bet for us as a city. And last but not least, manufacturing. I just went yesterday down to Calumet to meet with 50 manufacturing CEOs, what we can do better as a city and the state in the manufacturing area. Clearly, the governor's office and the mayor's office, we're working very closely together on the electric vehicle ecosystem. With Lions and Rivian, we have some great anchor clients or companies, but there's a lot of opportunities. You probably followed the very competitive pitch right now for electric battery factories, and we are in some of these discussions. So that's kind of like what we really focus on WellBiz Chicago. And since January 2021, we have seen some great business momentum, despite some of the challenge we have that I don't want to ignore. I like my key success metric is what we call pro-Chicago decisions. That means companies who are either relocated to Chicago or have significantly expanded. And since early January, we have over 150 pro-Chicago decisions. 70 companies have relocated to Chicago. So this means they have the first time they either moved the headquarters here or they open up the first time an office here. And over 80 companies have significantly expanded their presence in Chicago. Out of those 150, roughly 30 were on the south and west side, because we always have to think about equitable economic recovery. So I know the media sometimes doesn't talk about this, but these are 150 companies who looked at the landscape in North America and decided Chicago is the best place for us to grow. You probably hopefully saw some of our campaign focus on unicorns, means startups with a valuation of $1 billion. Since January, we have minted 40 new unicorns, more than many other, most US cities. We have never had that many kind of startups who have such an accelerated growth trajectory. And then one of the reasons why the mayor and I delegation went to San Francisco a couple of months ago is we see a huge opportunity to bring more venture capital money to Chicago. And right now, we are on roughly track of getting $7 billion of venture capital money invested in Chicago-based startups. Just for comparison, last year was $2.8 billion, which was a record year. So we are breaking all records in 2021, and I think this continued momentum maybe tell our story. So I'm overall pretty optimistic of what we have seen this year. And you see some of the mega developments, Lincoln Yards getting momentum. You saw the Michael Reese that passed City Council, 78 with our friends and related. So we see a lot of momentum, not just like in Fulton Market, but also some of the mega developments that we are supporting. Hopefully you follow me on LinkedIn. I just announced yesterday the construction jobs. Chicago it created the last 60 months the most construction job of any major US city with over 120,000. New York had a decline in construction jobs, but we had an increase in construction jobs. So overall, and then last but not least, I think Mark mentioned Invest Southwest. We're celebrating our 2-year anniversary. Invest Southwest. We identified over 10 corridors on the south and west side. And our 2-year anniversary is not yet public, but we will announce that we'll have over $1 billion raise that will be invested, public and private money. So we're seeing a lot of momentum, and most of these corridors will start construction throughout 2022. Longer term, I bet on Chicago, and I see 4 key trends that I call macro trends, because sometimes we get lost in the noise of the news. I continue to see, and the data confirms this, urban centers continue to be the hotbed for innovation, for energy, for young people want to be. If you look at the census data, the density in Chicago and over 30 neighborhoods have increased over the last 10 years. And I don't think the pandemic has fundamentally changed this. And no data that we have seen has shown that the pandemic has changed that, let's say, urbanization trend and higher density. Second, I think we are in a unique position in Chicago with our diverse talent pool. We always have an amazing talent. We have the universities. We educate within Chicago, within 3 years of driving, 50% of all computer engineers in the country. I think the diversity of our talent will be a long-term massive competitive advantage, because I think we are finally on the path to unlock all the talent that we have in Chicago across all 77 neighborhoods. So that's a trend, because we know well-managed, diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams. Third, a topic, global climate crisis is real. We do a lot right now to think about how can we reduce carbon and emissions. But if you look at the data as well, we are what I call more climate resilient than in a lot of our competitive large US cities. It shouldn't mean we shouldn't do our big part in change the trajectory that we're on right now in climate, but our access to fresh water and some other things show that we are more climate resilient. It's companies that I talk to look at this data very closely. And last but not least, infrastructure. Clearly, I think we have a great infrastructure, but we need to upscale and elevate the key infrastructure assets we have. And Mayor Lightfoot continues to be very supportive of the O'Hara expansion that really Mayor Raimondo started. So we hope as well the federal money is coming in, and I'm glad that we have an expert here who read the whole document with Greg, will be an opportunity to further upgrade our infrastructure. We need to be competitive. So overall, with these four macro trends, this continued urbanization and density, the diverse talent pool, the climate resiliency, and our strong infrastructure that we have to continue to keep, I think we are well positioned in Chicago and very optimistic. Thank you for having me, and looking forward to questions and the dialogue with the panel.
Well, Michael, this is Paul. I'll start off. First of all, it's impressive the number of things that you have going on, and it's obviously something that you're proud of. In your little 10-minute overview, we could probably spend 3 hours with follow-up questions on that, but we're not going to do that. We're going to try to focus a little bit. I want to start with the last thing you mentioned, which was infrastructure. As we look going forward, I want your perspective, but from my standpoint, I've had 25 years as CEO of 3 different manufacturing companies, and infrastructure was not an issue at one. It was a huge issue at one. Example, water heaters. We spent more money on shipping the product to the customer than we spent on labor to make it, because it's a big steel can full of air that you're shipping. And when I was in the cutting tool business, our shipper was UPS, and it was a very, very small amount, and everything in between. What do you see as far as infrastructure? You touched on it briefly, but if you could elaborate, especially on the Chicagoland area where we do have rail, which is terrific. We have some interstates. There's been a lot of discussion that we need a bypass around Chicago for trucks only, things like that. I'd love your perspective on that, please.
A few thoughts, and I think we have to look a bit broad on infrastructure. Yes, we have to. I think our roads are not in the shape they need to be. I think we need to continue to invest in rail. This is clearly for also climate reasons. So this is for me kind of the basic infrastructure components that we have neglected as a country, honestly. I mean, I went before the pandemic, I went to China. I mean, they have invested so much money in infrastructure, and I think we have neglected that. So I'm glad we are focused strongly on the airport. We have to as well, I think with the governors as well, look at the roads and then rail. And then a few infrastructure things that I know that I talked with the governor's office yesterday. You see the legislation around electric vehicle industry with incentives coming, which we are very supportive of, because the EV infrastructure is as well an infrastructure of the future. So what is the reload stations? What are the infrastructure you can really have electric vehicles that will be a competitive advantage for us? And last but not least, if you look at some of the transportation challenges, I hope that with Uber Freight having headquartered here, because we all know we are in a global logistics crisis, that we have an advantage to manage this better than other cities and other countries. Because if you look at the broader infrastructure as well, what Biden administration is well doing right now and spend a lot of money, and it will come more, how can we onshore some of the critical manufacturing processes that are primarily in China? If it's chips, if it's components for the EV, if it's batteries. And that will put more stress, I think, on our infrastructure, but also a huge opportunity. Because right now we are too dependent on key components and ingredients that are not produced in North America. This is not just an infrastructure question or manufacturing. Ultimately, it is a question of global security for us. And I think that the Biden administration realized it, and I think I see a lot of focus on that, and I'm very optimistic. That's kind of my long-winded answer on your question, Paul.
No, that was good. The follow-up is, you talked about manufacturing as being one of your the four areas of focus going forward. And that's not only expanding existing manufacturing, but convincing people to relocate. What do you hear? I mean, usually I've been involved in several dozen site location decisions, and they've been everything from logistics, like I mentioned, with water heaters where we needed to be spread out, so we're as close to the customers as we can be, to labor availability, trained labor availability. I remember one plant where we literally had to help rebuild a local tech school and refocus them in order to put a facility in that location because we needed to train people.
Yeah.
What are some of the things along those lines that you see to attract manufacturing?
That's a very good question. I see really four decision criteria, and we try, because I pitch every day in competitive against Texas or Tennessee or so. Number one, the site. Do we have an attractive site? It doesn't have to be Chicago. I think I try to work much closer with the CEO, the governor's office. We profit in Chicago if it's a site in Illinois, because sometimes some of them we don't have enough space. The advantage is we have a lot of still industrial zone space versus other big cities. So site, we have to be, and there's some opportunities I think coming down the pipeline. So site is where we have to be better. Second is the incentive side. My view on this is we will never out incentivize some of the southern state. And I think we shouldn't. We should win. We should be competitive, but we shouldn't be the leader in giving that. That's politically very challenging. Another thing is not, I was involved in the Amazon HQ2 pitch, and Amazon asked for $2 billion tax benefits. And we try to tell them, your decision and $2 billion is nothing in your long-term decision, because you make a decision for 20 years with 25,000. It's a small fraction. Your focus on this is completely wrong-headed. And then you see what they did. They went to a place, they had no tax incentive. Now they got kicked out of New York because it didn't work. And now they're still growing in New York despite zero tax incentives. Third is workforce. So I think our key competitive advantage has to be workforce. We have diverse talent, and I agree with you. We need to, I think, get away a little bit from our complete focus on a four-year college degree. I think we oversteered, or everyone who goes out of CPS should have a four-year college degree. I don't agree with that. We don't agree with that. Yes, a lot should be, but it's not the right thing. A lot of industry, if it's manufacturing, if it's food manufacturing, is it tech, you don't need a four-year college degree. You need maybe a great degree, city college, you get a trade school. I think we have to emphasize that more. Last but not least, and like I said, I met with 50 manufacturing CEOs yesterday. Both, I think the governor's office and the mayor's office, I think we have not done the best job to tell that we are business friendly. I think some of them here, the feedback I'm hearing, we are not perceived, especially manufacturing, as business friendly. And I told the mayor this in a long discussion with her yesterday about this. We have to change this. And some stuff is just because we are sometimes too slow to react, and it's just, we have to be business friendly. It doesn't mean we have to agree on everything, but we at least have to be responsive. We have to listen to the business leaders. And ultimately with the deputy mayor, Samir Maika, and myself, we're trying to be the translator and bridge between the government, the mayor's office and city hall, and the business community. And I'm very vocal on this to be much more business friendly than I think people perceive.
Okay, Greg, do you have a follow-up?
Well, I really do think you're spot on with those four last comments, particularly the fourth one and the second one. Incentives are overplayed. I see a huge opportunity with the hard infrastructure bill, which passed the Senate. And having read it, the thing that strikes me about it is something that's been part of the alliance since 2012 when OECD did the report. We have a mega region. We also have, and the point I want to make and get your feedback on is, we have skill sets that are really pretty deep in Indiana and Wisconsin. In Indiana, Mitch Daniels, when he was governor, stood up a privatization of a toll road. It didn't go well on the private side, but it did go well on the public side. Also, the Ohio Bridge deal that brought in Vinci to span the Ohio River was a very well done P3. Kentucky has had a lesser track record with its broadband. But my question is this: should we create study groups which ultimately drive to structures, perhaps special agencies that are cross state lines in an attempt to get an outsized share of those infrastructure dollars? Because in the bill, there's talk about projects of national significance. And you get higher ratings on those projects if you collaborate across state lines. So it's a question of planning around classes of infrastructure. I'd argue broadband first. I think energy conservation would be second, and third would be transit. And our second panel that's going to be on here today is tech and also transit, and it goes from South Bend in to Chicago. I discovered at a ULI meeting last week that there's this agency that's in US DOT, which provides huge long-term 35-year capital, which can take out infrastructure projects that are financed through the construction phase and then becomes long-term. So is there a way to, Chicago has had a checkered record, frankly, not the current administration, but prior administrations in terms of an infrastructure trust and things of that sort. There's a huge opportunity with this legislation if we can get our act together. And there's huge funding for Amtrak and things of that sort. So I've given you some specific examples. How do we bring coherence to that in terms of Chicago and Illinois and the rest of the Midwest?
It's a very good question. I'm not sure if I have a great answer. I probably have two perspectives on this. First, as you know, I grew up in the private sector, so I joined the public sector like last March. I'm still waking up sometimes and being astounded how this works. I have stories for my grandchildren. First is, I think we sometimes underestimate the lack of capacity in public government to even digest these massive multi-billion dollars pots of money that we can apply for. Because it's not just applying for, and then as well investing it smartly. Because we have a city government, and I work in Chicago, we was managing our current work and our current budget. Suddenly you have multiple billions coming in, some of them competitive. You have to apply for it. You have to coordinate things. And then you have to as well write out the grants in a smart, fiduciary, responsible way. So what we did now, because we realized, and we talked with some other governors and mayors and with the Biden administration and Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, maybe we had a chat with him when he was in town. He said like his biggest concern is that the government entities, cities say, are not set up to apply for this managers wisely. So what I did in World with Chicago, which I control, I hired now a few people who are only focusing on applying for federal grants and managing these federal grants. And the addition to what I had before, because it's a full-time job, it's highly complicated. We just applied for competitive grant we put a coalition together with some universities, with MHUB, we're optimistic about. So that's a bigger problem, this capacity issue, than I think a lot of people realize. The second one, it's politically not easy across these all entities. I focus to get very close with the governor's office. I think Andy Manar, the new deputy governor, is a great man. I just talked with him yesterday a few things because I want to get us fully aligned, and because that is important. To then even go across other states, I think it's very challenging. And then especially we in the morning, some of them trying to now attract our police officers because they don't have a non-vaccination rule. So the political climate for some of this collaboration is very challenging. I think organizations like you are so critical because you're not in the noise, the political noise, to make this happen, and then come with a proposal to like an organization of World Business Chicago. For us to lead this as business parables, yeah, it makes sense. With the political noise, it's more challenging than I ever thought. That's not a good answer, but that is the reality, honestly.
Well, that's a very good answer. And so if we were to pick a sector,
yeah,
and then we pick a project, and then we empanel it with people who have the bandwidth,
yeah,
and the capacity to do it, and then we work with yourself and the deputy mayor and others, I think we can get some traction there. When the OECD report was presented in Paris, the territorial review that Paul and I were involved with back in 2012, Rebecca Blank was the US representative to OECD. Then she went to the University of Wisconsin, and she's coming to Northwestern at the end of August. So there's some strands that we can pull together. And I think it's a small working group. Yesterday, we heard from Tommy Thompson, who's the head of the University of Wisconsin system. But in his background, he headed Amtrak. He also was a cabinet secretary. So I'm fond of a small, tight group that take ownership of something that creates what I like to call fragile momentum.
Yeah.
And I think you've done that a number of times. And you mentioned a moment ago, M-Hub. That is an amazing team. And I think there's an awful lot in that group that can spread into the Midwest.
I completely agree, Greg. The key advice is you have to lead this. If you expect the mayors of the government to lead this across, it will not happen. If you lead this, we will support it. Like Samir and I can make sure we have to support, but that's there is too much political noise to make this happen. But we will not, if we see a great idea, the governors, the mayors across the table, we will not stand in the way. We will be supportive, but we cannot drive it. That is my experience over the last 18 months working in the sector.
Yeah, I think that's sage counsel. Paul, other thoughts?
Yeah, I want to go back. Thanks, Greg. Go back to, last year we had, as part of this summit, we had the mayors of Milwaukee, Chicago, and Gary on a panel. And it was a very interesting discussion, what they had to say. They obviously, if a job opens up in Kenosha, Wisconsin, it's going to get employees from Illinois. It might even get employees from Indiana coming across the border. And, nobody really pays attention when you're looking for a job as to whether it's across state lines or not. Now, you mentioned that the lead is going to have to come from somewhere other than, the mayor of Chicago is probably not going to be actively involved in getting an organization to locate in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But other people can. And from a political standpoint, I believe the other mayors and the other civic leaders and the governors would support it.
I
Can
agree.
you give us advice on what we ought to be doing in that respect, other than starting the process?
No, I think two thoughts. One is, and I think Mayor, I work with Mayor Rahm Emanuel on quite a few projects. I was a big fan of him, but he was really focused on, if you live 1 foot outside of city limits, I will get you to the 1 foot in the other direction. And Mayor Lightfoot is not.
We ran into that, by the way. With,
yes, I know. And Mayor Lightfoot has changed that tonality. We don't, like my organization, we don't recruit actively at all out of the suburbs or even the state. That is not, if someone calls us, we help, but we are not, that is not our focus. So I think that helps, I think, in this conversation. The second, I think, like what Greg said, we need an organization like MHUBs, MXDs. They are, because they want to grow and they're not as political in this noise. Partner with them because there might be an app up somewhere else or they want to expand. That's what I think is what we're hearing from Washington. They love if the MHUBs of the world get together, some university and research, it is Argonne Fermilab, some other players, and then have the elected official support. That's what they love. And that's what we did right now with this one, like a $75 million grant we're optimistic about. Where we put this together, and WBC was a quarterback, helped it, get all the elected officials supportive. But you need the MHUBs of the world, whatever sector you're choosing. That's my advice.
Following up on that, you had a comment about the logistics and distribution industry. That's thoughts number one is how aggregated is it? Cohesive, because, and then to what degree can the innovation piece, Uber Freight, also enter into a deeper set of conversations, because we really do have the transportation grid for the whole country, and with 6 of the 7 class 1 railroads. Then you add to that the ability that's the fiber optic highway. And there's a whole lot of it there. And then how do we marry those two things together? I guess my thought is we need to place some bets. And in your opening comments, you did a lot of that. And what I'm struggling with as an Illinoisan, honestly, is that I'm seeing a lot of government policy and thoughtful leadership at the city. But I'm not seeing as much of that at the state, and so I may be ignorant on the issue, but how do we how do we galvanize that Springfield Chicago connection in a way that helps us win certain things where we have natural attributes or man-made stuff that's been around for a very long time?
That's a very good question, Greg. Like I said, I think Andy Manar, the new deputy governor, I'm big hopeful that he's a great partner and very transparent on everything. When if you look at the big infrastructure buckets that we discussed at the beginning, roads, rail, fiber optics, and then probably EV, I would call them to that. I mean, the governors are focused very much on EV, which I'm supportive about. I think on rail, I think we probably should just agree what is the one or two projects that really change your trajectory. I think sometimes I learn, no, we focus on too many small things. No, what is trajectory changing projects? And that's both on roads and rail. In fact, that's what we just pick one or two, because I learned as well in government, the government cannot do too many things at once. You one thing really well. And we need partners like you to tell us, hey, this is our recommendation. This is the one thing. Can you sitting up agree on this one thing? And I think we probably can. That's what I would recommend.
That makes a lot of sense. Paul, I have one more question that Michael, you have deep expertise in branding. How do we take that important agenda item and how do we work with the press so that we get the best possible story that it can be fashioned around our successes? I will confess to really being perplexed about press management, particularly in local and regional markets as opposed to national markets. I've heard you talk about this in the past. There may not be secret sauce, but what
yeah. I think this is off the record here. No media is here, I think.
Right.
Yeah. So if you look at the press and media, you really have three buckets. You have for Chicago, you have the local press, you have the national press, and you have social media. My learning now coming from the space, the local media will not change their mind.
Right.
You have to manage them. You have to tell your story. You try to get on your side. But ultimately, I did now in the last 20 years. Every mayor got criticized. This is like, it was not, and we will not change this. And then you have to look at the numbers. The viewership in the journalistic depth has decreased significantly. So the relevance of local media I don't like to hear it, has decreased significantly. Second, national media is friendlier if you look at the coverage. You might think, they talk about violence, but they do. But we did analysis. National media normally is friendlier to Chicago than local media. So what we are doing now, we are spending more time with national media. You have probably yesterday, New York Times, the Daily was about the mayor and the police. We have very friendly audiences. If it's Good Morning America, and some shows, they're pretty friendly to Chicago, to our story. And so we spend a lot more time there. And third is social media. I mean, the mayor, we have now over 1 million followers on her social media, and we have a lot of engagement. So we're really telling our story much more aggressively, what we're seeing. When I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'm telling you, I looked at the numbers, if I have a good post, I have more readership on my LinkedIn post than the business section of the Tribune. So because it's just the Tribune, it's not even a separate section anymore. I look at the readership numbers. So we just expanding our social media because I cannot fight the local media fight 80% of my time. And this is how we think more strategically. And if you look at, and the other thing is we doing now, I don't know if you've seen, like we did sometimes paid campaigns now. The whole discussion about unicorns broke through because we did a very small digital campaign 3 months ago. And now people talk about unicorns. No one ever talked about Chicago and unicorns. So we have to be a little bit smarter on that. That's my perspective.
Thank you. Paul?
Okay. There's so many other subjects we could get into, but I'd love to get your perspective on a new area, and that is the area of climate change, climate resiliency. That's part of the infrastructure bill now. Yeah. What is your perspective on that, and how do you see it playing out, frankly, over the next 5 or 10 years?
Very good question. So there are two topics, and I'm spending more time now with our Chief Sustainability Officer on that. I think we're doing some great programs about It's all about reducing carbon emission that we control in Chicago. I think we haven't, but I'm not happy about, we haven't told enough about this to position Chicago as a true leader on this. We did a lot of interesting programs that we haven't, and I told this to me as well. I think we have done not a good job with good reasons, with COVID, with civic unrest. We haven't focused on that. So 2022 will be much more, we will position Chicago as a true leader, as an urban city, as an urban center to drive reduction of carbon emission. The second one, which we also haven't communicated enough, is what, like you said, climate resiliency. And I think we do have, and this is, I don't want to sound like stranger, we do have a competitive advantage on this. And it does not mean we shouldn't reduce carbon emission. We have to continue, but we do have a competitive advantage. I think people realize more and more our access to fresh water is a massive competitive advantage versus the cities on the coast. You saw the water deal with the city of Joliet, that will continue to be a huge advantage. But we have never talked about this. So you can see probably next year, next couple years, more focus on that, but always combined with, we need to continue to reduce carbon emission as city leaders.
Where do you see us 10 years from now? Do you think we'll be successful? By the way, you and I could spend a couple hours talking about water, since we have 21% of the world's fresh water in the Great Lakes. But where do you see the whole area of not just carbon emissions, but overall other areas relative to climate change and how that plays out over the next 10 years?
I mean, we have to make a decision as a city and as a country. Are we willing to sacrifice short-term a few things to change the trajectory? Because the trajectory we're on is not very, it doesn't look that rosy as a country and as a world. I mean, if I talk with young people, this is one of their top 3 topics they're talking every single day about. And my kids ask me about it. What are you doing about this? So I think the electrification of the area of the Midwest is a huge opportunity for us. I think we underestimated China because they focus so much right now. And you see, I mean, the electric vehicle industry is booming and they're exporting out to Europe. You saw a probably interesting article in the New York Times today about Norway. It's a pilot market for them. So the electrification is a big one. So I'm optimistic, but the future is not happening. We create the future. And we have to make some tough decisions, maybe investing. That's why I'm very supportive of Biden's focus on all the climate investments. It looks like most of them will not get through. We have to make some decisions on this, if this will not solve by itself.
One follow-up, and then I see, Greg, you had a question come up in the chat room. I'll turn it back to you in a minute. But one area that I think our country is behind in is mass transit. I've been to Europe a lot. I've been to Asia a lot. High-speed rail. A lot of people get to work that way. We get in our car and you drive down the highway and there's one person driving one car and usually in a traffic jam trying to get to work. Do you see anything coming up that's going to help that? I've been talking about it for years, decades, of the need for mass transit and telling the story about what the rest of the world is doing.
I mean, as you can hear from my accent, you might think, oh, did you grow up in the northern part of Illinois? No. I grew up in Germany, and clearly, we know in Europe mass transit, and yeah, I think we are behind on this. And I hope, depending on what like the infrastructure bill comes through, that maybe we'll pick 1 or 2 big mass transit projects for Chicago. The good thing is we have much better infrastructure, public infrastructure, mass transit than most cities on the West Coast. But we should pick 1 or 2 big projects. I know a lot of people made fun of this project that the previous administration. Remember the tunnel project with Elon Musk company, where they want to build like a tunnel transit from downtown to O'Hara. I thought it was an intriguing idea. I know it's not alive anymore, but we need some big, bold ideas. It does not mean that this particular project is right, but we need some big, bold ideas. And I think sometimes, I'm a US citizen now. I think sometimes we have to be our best American and be big and bold and do things that other countries wouldn't do.
Well,
so an incremental approach is not a good one. Go ahead, Greg.
We have to place some bets. The one question came in. I mentioned an agency at USDOT. It's Build America Bureau. And it got its start in 2015. And to Michael's earlier point about lack of capacity within government, that particular part of USDOT, half the people there offer technical assistance. So, if you pick the right project, and I'm a huge believer in what Michael just said, make some bets, pick the right major project, and then marshal the support around it. And the thing that is truly amazing about that agency, or the bureau that I just mentioned, they give you dry powder for 5 years. They'll put money in the bank, 100% takeout financing on a major project. Then you add to that the new dollars that are coming in and the emphasis on industries of the future, whether it's broadband or energy and batteries and things of that sort. And then we stand up the right corporate coalition around it. And Haven Allen at MHub has done this in a way where it's hiding in plain sight. He goes to a cohort in an industry, he gets a lead player in the corporate world, and then he folds the startups into that. And it gives you exits. It's a beautiful middle market strategy, but it goes to scale. And I tend to think that if we were to tap the expertise at Indiana and Wisconsin and other Midwestern states that have done these large infrastructure projects and make them our partner on a regional solution, that's a way to attack the lack of expertise and frankly transcend the political problems that we have if we sought ourselves to be the leader. So, some musings on a way forward, but it's all about making bets.
No, I completely agree with Greg, and people who don't know on this panel are Haven, who's CEO of Emma, great leader, and I completely agree. We helping, he did this clean energy next fund now. We helping him selling it to the corporate community. We need people like him. And like I said, ultimately my job is to highlight these folks, what their projects, their bets, and help them to connecting to the big companies who all want to help. This is, as an immigrant, I can say this. The Chicago business leadership is just amazing. I have now 95 board members at Walt Disney Chicago, most CEOs of large firms. And I call them and how can I help? They all want to help. They all want to make our city, Chicagoland better. And they all transcend the political noise that we sometimes get lost in every day.
There's a question in chat that, if it's okay, Paul, it comes
Please,
from
go ahead.
A deeply knowledgeable player, John Anderson from Greenleaf. And his question is, how will we use best downscaled climate modeling leadership at the University of Illinois to inform intelligent infrastructure improvements to improve our city or region's resilience and sustainable development? That's a question, John, that's likely to be answered in the next panel, because we've got a world expert coming in, Gordon Gill, among other people on his panel. But the germ of what's in that question is we have the university expertise. How do we marry it into the dialogue in a way that's systematic? And ESG as an investment idea and category is attracting huge capital inflows. If we create an armature which can bind onto that, that's a way to build momentum. I don't pretend to be the deep expert in that some of our other panelists are, but I think it's, Paul, I'm sure the Water Council has that kind of brain power that we could bring to bear on a series of these issues.
The one big bet I think the state is doing that we are supporting is electrification. And I think I would like, like you said, what are the other one or two big bets that based on research will have the best positive impact for our climate future? And
you're right, Greg, about the Water Council. When the Water Council first started, it was just a collaborative group, and now there are things going on. It's an innovation hub. They start up businesses that then spin off. We offer a facility and some support structure around that to help. And there's other things. It's almost a very, very small scale MHub that Haven has got going on there. We're about to run out of time,
Yeah.
Michael. I'm going to ask, with the infrastructure bill, which may, it's something will come out. I think we all agree. What do you think the number one and number two priorities should be for our region that come out of that we should take on? I know you've already covered a lot of priorities. I'm asking you to get very, very focused on the one or two, maybe the big bets that we make.
Yeah. The one big that we haven't talked about, and because I don't want to repeat what I said before, is if we think long term is quantum computing. It says infrastructure. Yes, we within Chicagoland have 2 of the 5 national research centers. We have 40% of the federal money that goes into quantum computing. Now, the quantum computing is as well to the fiber optics, the connectivity, and quantum computing will run our lives in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And we have the unique opportunity that most people don't talk about, that we becoming the true global center, maybe one of the top 3 for quantum computing. We have the first quantum computing accelerator in the world here in Chicago. So that is one that I will figure out how to, but that's not helping tomorrow, but that will help our children in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And we have no, which is just a side story, we have no first startups moving to Chicago from some areas. Oh no, because you're the center. It's France. Either I have to move to France or I have to come to Chicago. Like a quantum computing chip company who just moved with MHub, they helped us in MXD, to Chicago. So this is a huge opportunity. I think some of the federal money, besides some of the other infrastructures we talk about, I think that will be one of our focus points.
Okay, well, that's a whole other area that we could get into at this point too. So I'm pretty well out of questions. Greg, do you have anything else?
Well, I just would follow up on that. You think about when the super collider was going to go to Waxahachie, and it didn't because of a change in administration, and Argonne and Fermi competed for it. And now we're at a point in time under the radar, as you point out, where the U of C, having overseen those 2 labs since the 1940s or 50s, is positioned. Northwestern also has deep expertise in nanotechnology. We can compete with France and Switzerland and their Hadron Collider because we have not only the money, but we've got long skill sets in that area. And I think that's in some ways probably our biggest opportunity for the industry. And down the road from us is Purdue, which has huge talent in that respect, and up the road is UW-Madison. And so if we can marry those Midwestern universities together in a more systematic way, frankly, beyond the tri-state area, then our intellectual capital, I think, in the Midwest is an equal, we talked about this yesterday, to anywhere else. I mean, we don't have quite the venture capital that Silicon Valley has, but that it's growing, and the number and candidly, our governor is one of the reasons that happened, because he stood up in 1871.
I completely agree. 1871. He started 1871. So, but well said, Greg. I think it's always a pleasure to talk with people who know a lot of things, but also who are always trying to look for solutions. I always appreciate all what the organization is doing. I think is so critical for our reach of our city. So I want to thank you as well for everything you do. I know it's a lot of pro bono volunteer work here. So thank you for your service.
Mark?
Michael, we appreciate you being on this, giving us your perspective today. I found it extremely interesting, and hopefully we can continue the dialogue going forward.
Thank you.
Mark?
Exactly. Thank you very much for that. And it's the perfect setup for our next panel, which will be with us in just a second. Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Paul. What a great conversation.